We are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast and continue looking over Week 14 because there were some pretty big games and some pretty big victories as well coming from Sunday, starting off with the Steelers getting a home victory over the Cleveland Browns. Despite the Steelers stressing that it wasn't a revenge game, they got their get back against Cleveland in a 27-14 victory over the Browns, which brings the Steelers to 10-3 on the season, which is important, obviously, based on the other results in Week 14, because now the Steelers are 10-13, and with the loss by the Buffalo Bills, they're also 10-13, opening the door for the Steelers to potentially squeeze in there for the number 2 seed. Unlikely in all reality, but it is what it is. They have the same record, so in reality, the Steelers could get there, but the path to get there is a lot harder than any other AFC playoff team in the playoffs currently right now. So that's what they're kind of facing as of right now. While Cleveland was not playing for much in this game, but they were in this game because Pittsburgh was playing without George Pickens. He was inactive before the game. The report said that he was going to try it out, but quickly, it became a situation where they didn't feel comfortable with it, so they decided to make him inactive. And on that note, real quick, Mike Tomlin had his press conference today and said that, George Pickens had an MRI. The MRI came back with, news that the injury was a little bit more severe than they originally thought. So, there's no diagnosis or anything like that, but Mike Tomlin said that George Pickens at this point is doubtful for the game against Philadelphia. If he had to give an answer, he probably would have said that George was not going to play, but they are going to let it obviously play out throughout the week. But that's obviously huge news because of what George means to this offense. But it wasn't enough for the Browns to win because, they got in their own way a lot of the times, mainly with their kicker missing 2 field goals in this game. Even if he still made them, based on the same score, they still would have lost. But, those field goals came at very important times in the game where, missing them was going to be so deflating. And we saw it play out in this game. But throughout this game, Winston also threw 2 more interceptions. One that allowed the Steelers offense to get going with Keanu Benton intercepting it, putting the Steelers in enemy territory when they obviously scored their first touchdown. Then the second one ended the game pretty much. So the 2 turnovers that they had also came at very crucial points in the game, and really it was all about the turnover battle. Really that and the penalties also, 9-6 in favor of the Steelers, and the third down conversions were huge because the Browns, for how well they played at home in the snow and in front of their home crowd, obviously, in Pittsburgh on Sunday, there were only 2 for 13 on third down conversions to the Steelers, 6 of 14. So not great on either side, but the Browns to only convert 2 out of 13 third downs that you had is obviously a massive, swing in how your offense, flows throughout the game. But overall, in this game, how the game broke down and where, we saw kind of the Steelers pull away was initially when this game started, the Steelers were up 3-0, but Cleveland, came out fast and they scored a touchdown through Jerry Jeudy extending the play or Winston extending the play, finding Jerry Jeudy for 7 points. So the Browns were up 3-7 early in this game, but like I mentioned, when Jameis Winston threw that first interception, that's when the game started to turn a little bit for Pittsburgh, because up until that point, the Steelers' offense was still trying to find their way without their leading receiver. I heard something like on Sunday that some of the receivers like Scotty Miller, like Pat Freiermuth even, knew or actually didn't know that George wasn't going to play until quite soon to kickoff, quite close to the game starting. So with that in mind, they went out there and they showed that they weren't really expecting to be without George Pickens. So they were really struggling, but the game started to turn, like I said, when Pittsburgh intercepted Jameis Winston. It was their defensive tackle, Keanu Benton, of all people, to kind of step in the passing lane of a screen pass and intercept Jameis Winston. And then the Steelers capitalized on that right away, and Najee Harris scored a touchdown. So now they were leading 10-7, and it got to 13-7 after Chris Boswell hit another field goal. But the Browns were driving into Pittsburgh territory to end the first half, and they eventually got stopped on third down. But Cleveland had an opportunity to cut the lead to only 3. But then we got our first missed field goal. The first missed field goal came right before halftime, which, I mean, it's not like a touchdown right before the half, right, obviously, but it is at least something, right? You get at least a little bit of points, and then when you look up at that scoreboard, you're not down by 6 points. You're only down by 3. So the fact that they missed that one stung, but it didn't hurt as much as their second one, because their second one came right after halftime ended, because the Browns got the ball first, and they were, again, in position to kick another field goal, and this time cut it down to 3 points. But again, their kicker missed, and now you kind of start getting in your own head, right? You miss another field goal, you're like, damn, like, this game could have been tied right now at 13-13, but instead you missed both of them, and now you're still down 6. And of course, how things go when you usually miss those gimme points. The Steelers scored a touchdown right after that to push it at 20-7, and then another turnover on downs led to the Steelers' next touchdown. So in just the blink of an eye, the Steelers go up by 20 points at this point in the game, and now, at least for me, it looks like the Browns are pretty much out of it. But it got a little bit interesting in the fourth quarter, because the Steelers scored so quickly that it felt like it was over, being up 20 points, but there was still so much time left that the Browns scored a touchdown in the fourth quarter. But they scored a touchdown after Pittsburgh fumbled. But then once they actually got the ball back, Jameis threw that second interception, in which really ended the game at 27-14. So, I mean, overall, from this game, and knowing that there was no George Pickens, it was a concern prior to the game. I thought he was going to play. When he popped up on that injury report on Friday, I believe, I figured that it wasn't anything too serious. I thought he was going to test it out and that he was going to play anyway, but I was pretty surprised that he didn't play. But even during the game, even though they won, it was probably, the fact that they were playing Cleveland, that this wasn't a major issue. I mean, they did struggle, don't get me wrong, but, they eventually figured it out, and I think that, in my opinion, has more to do with the Browns being pretty bad than the Steelers, having, other guys step up in huge moments. But also in that same breath, Mike Williams made a nice catch. Pat Freiermuth scored again. Van Jefferson scored. So, again, those are all great. Those guys played a part in it. But I feel like this is going to be a bigger problem against the best teams, coming up. So, it leads into those next games that we're going to talk about, right? Because the Steelers right now are sitting pretty at 10-3. It's great. It's fantastic. You're getting excited a little bit, right, if you're a Steelers fan. But their last 4 games, are going to be at Philadelphia, at Baltimore, at home against the Chiefs, and at home against the Bengals to end the year, the regular season. They've had some nice games. They've had some nice wins, especially over the Baltimore Ravens. The Commanders game was great for them, and I'll even throw this game in there. This was a pretty good win for them as well. But they've, for the most part, beaten all the teams that they should have, right? They should have beaten the Cowboys. They're going to want that one back. The Colts game, they were pretty dominated in that game, so, that one would go either way. And the Browns game, in Cleveland, that could have gone their way. They were winning at one point, but they threw it away as well. But for the most part, they've beaten the teams that they should have beaten, hence the 10-3 record. But during the second part of the schedule, where a lot of people didn't favor them, even still, they've gotten some pretty nice results, right? Up until this point, they're doing great. They're in first place in the AFC North, where a lot of people felt that they were going to fall off from the Commanders game going forward. So even still, I think the next 4 games is a whole different level, right? Everyone's talking about the Steelers. Are they contenders or not? Are they going to be a real threat in the playoffs? Is Russell Wilson really that guy for them? We've seen it to a decent level now, beating the Bengals in a shootout, beating the Browns now, beating the Commanders. But I think to really be in that level, we're going to see it over the next 4 games, right? 3 of the next 4 teams are what I consider, the elite teams in the NFL. These are the real Super Bowl contenders in Philadelphia, Kansas City, and I'll throw Baltimore in there as well, even though the Steelers beat them already. This is the litmus test, right? This is the way you know if you can compete for a conference championship in anybody's wildest dreams for a Super Bowl, right? If in any world also you can get to the number 2 seed, to get to the number 2 seed, you're going to have to probably beat 2, if not 3 of these teams coming up. And that's going to be almost, I don't like saying impossible, but, without George, you don't know how long he's going to be out. If you get the number 2 seed and let's say you beat the Eagles and the Chiefs or something like that, and you go 2-2 over these next 4, that would be pretty decent. And I think you can consider the Steelers in a list of Super Bowl contenders. They would be the last one, right at the cutoff, right? If they win 2 of the next 4. But the next 3 games are super hard, at Philly, at Baltimore, and against the Chiefs. But it's what this team, wants, right? If you want to be considered among those teams, you got to go out and beat them. And I think this would tell a lot of people whether or not the Steelers are serious. Of course, how they win and how they lose potentially is important. But, the win over the Browns was great, but the next 3 are really going to tell us all we need to know about this Steelers team. Albeit a little bit unfair if George Pickens doesn't play, but it is what it is, right? These next 3 games are going to be exciting, but also very difficult for the Steelers. But we're going to leave that topic there for a little bit, and we're going to move on to 2 more that we have on today's show. Looking at the Vikings and Falcons game, it was Kirk Cousins' return to Minnesota, but it did not go in his favor at all. And the Minnesota Vikings dominated the Falcons, sending them to a 4-game losing streak while they keep pace with the Detroit Lions. We're going to go into that game and talk about what we learned about it and whether or not the Falcons should consider a quarterback change. That is coming up right after this.